والسلام على رسول الله. يا ربنا زدنا علما وتقوى وبارك في أوقاتنا وفي أقوالنا وفي أفعالنا وتقبل منا ولا تأخذنا بقصورنا وذنوبنا ونحن من القاصرين ومن الظالمين، فلا تغفر لي ذنوب إلا أنت، سبحانك لا إله إلا أنت، إني كنت من الظالمين. ولا غافر ولا مجيب الدعوة إلا أنت، فنتوجه إليك ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك. والعصر إن الإنسان في خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. أما بعد. So we are now into الباب الأول في أركان الإيمان from مرات الطلاب that was written by the Mujaddid ومحيي السنة شيخ عثمان دانفودي رحمة الله عليه. In this section, we covered part of what it is that Sheikh Uthman Danfodi rahmatullahi alayhi is introducing with regard to knowledge. Now, one of the things that we wanted to pause on is to reflect upon the style of the text or the logic of the text, the underlying uh, flow in structure. The text overall is written as 50 lessons. It was foundational knowledge with regard to understanding Iman, Islam, and Ihsan. All of those three realities taken together, the reality of Iman, which some translate as faith, of Islam, which is focused on the practices of Islam versus the belief uh, or the creed of Islam, and then Ihsan, which has to do with the perfection of one's spiritual life. All of those three things, when taken together, Iman, Islam, and Ihsan, constitute Deen. Hafid ibn Rajab, rahmatullahi alayhi, in his explanation of the 40 hadith, entitled Jami' al-Ulumi wal-Hikam, or the compendium as is understood in the uh, English language or translated into the English language, the compendium of knowledge and wisdom. In that explanation, we find the discussion, especially when we look at the Hadith of Jibreel, which is a central text being invoked here by Sheikh Uthman Danfodi, foundational evidence or reference for what it is that he's presenting as Iman. There, Sheikh Uthman Danfodi, I apologize, in the explanation of the 40 Hadith, Hafid ibn Rajab explains why it is that we can say the term Islam, the term Iman, and the term Ihsan, why these terms at times can overlap and indicate to the same thing. And then what is the case that we take each term by itself? And he explains the idea that Deen constitutes these three dimensions of revelation. Now, I don't want to go in too much depth in that regard. If it's worthy or if it's something that's beneficial, maybe that can be done as a separate lecture if there's some need for clarification in that regard. In any event, for those that are interested, they can go to that text to get a little more depth on the concept. Now, here, Sheikh Uthman Danfodi, he's talking about the cornerstones of Iman, the cornerstones of Iman. And one of the things that I wanted to mention is that this text overall is using the Warsh qira'at or recitation. So sometimes you're going to find that the diacritical marks as related to the ayat of the Quran that are quoted in this text, it may not match. They may not match with what's popularly available in the Mus'haf that we have that's printed. That's basically dominated by the Warsh, not by the Warsh recitation, by the Hafs recitation, by the Hafs recitation. So I don't want people to think that they're on some issues like this, that there's errors. Rather, it's a different recitation that we're encountering. Sheikh Uthman Danfodi, interestingly enough, he begins this book with Babul Awul fi Arkan al-Iman. He begins with a discussion on Iman. In part, we can find the logic that the way of the ulama in writing their texts, many times they began with talking about Iman because of the foundational nature of Iman. And because action is dependent upon a person believing in the fundamental teachings of Islam with regard to who Allah is and what is the purpose of life and realities of the unseen. That's one thing. The second thing is that he begins this section with quoting an ayah from the Quran that is an extremely important ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah. In Surah Al-Baqarah, this ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, it is extremely important from a number of different angles. Is the 177th ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah. And it's important because it's an ayah that is revealed in the context of a series of ayat which deal with the details of the Sharia, first of all. But the ayat that he quotes in this sense is not only dealing with Sharia, but it's dealing with the reality of Iman. And so you see how it is that the Quran interlocks belief and practice together. The other issue is that the whole context in which this ayah is revealed, in terms of context, meaning the other ayat that come along when they constitute a thematic whole, a thematic whole. And so the book itself takes on the same flavor of the ayat that Sheikh Uthman Danfodio quotes and the context in which is revealed. And to be a little more clear cut with that, the ayat is revealed in the context of other ayat which are talking about details of the Sharia, but tying these ideas to the reality of Iman. And so his book also, this book that we're reading, Mirat al-Tullab, it starts off with focusing on the reality of Iman, and then the rest of what we find in the text is dealing with the practice of the deen and the spirit of how practice should be and how the life of the soul should be. That's pretty much the same type of meanings that we get from these ayat that are found in Surah Al-Baqarah, which is 163 to 177. So when we take all those ayat as a whole, we get the same type of thinking that we find in Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodi's book. Whether he did that intentionally or not is a question to itself, but it's very, very interesting in that regard. The ayah is important from another uh, series of angles as well. Of those things which make this ayah important is that it characterizes for us or clarifies for us what is worship. What is worship in practice and in spirit and in belief. The other thing is that the ayah is defining the idea of bir, which is a very important word. Usually it's associated with another word, taqwa. Bir is a very important word. It's not defined by the Quran in some sort of like by rational explanation. It's actually clarified more so by examples. More so by examples. And the ayah says, ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب ولكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر وملائكته والكتاب والنبيين. Right. And so here, the idea of bir is is talked about in light of it being a series of actions, a series of actions, and those actions that are mentioned here have to do with believing in the unseen. So they're actions of the heart. The ayah that reflected upon this ayah, and I looked at it from a few different angles, covering a few different types of tafsir. The first type of tafsir that I looked at was the thematic tafsir by Dr. Mustafa Muslim. And that's where the connection between the context of the ayah in terms of the various ayat that came before it and how it is that this ayah is connected to those other ayat. That context gives us the meaning that this part of Surah Al-Baqarah, of which this ayah is a part, is dealing with the reality of what Sharia is and what Ibadah is, as was pointed to. I also looked at the linguistic, some linguistic points in the ayah across a number of different tafsirs. First of all, the idea of bir, which is usually translated as God, as righteousness, is usually translated as righteousness. Taqwa is usually translated as God consciousness, and there's some problems with those definitions, but people are used to those definitions. But here, Imam Ibn al-Jawzi, he says, في مراد البر ثلاثة أقوال, that with regard to the meaning of bir, there's three meanings, or there's three positions that the scholars take. One, that it means iman. Two, that it means taqwa. And three, that it means العمل الذي يقرب إلى الله, or that act which brings us close to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. When taken all together, all these meanings give us different insights as to the word bir. The word taqwa uh, is more restricted in its meaning. And so I don't want to get into the idea that bir means taqwa. The Quran sometimes meanings can overlap one another so that they seem to be synonymous. But I'm not of the opinion that the Quran utilizes words always in a synonymous way. So, in any event, all of that aside, bir here, it is being used in the context of Iman. And the proof of that is that the ayah itself says, لكن البر من آمن بالله. Right? And so the ayah reads in the English language, it is not bir that you turned your faces to the east and the west, but bir is that you believe in Allah, right? That's the part of iman which comes out in the as far as the meaning of bir. Bir means that you believe in Allah, the hereafter, the angels, uh, the revelation, and the prophets. And so here, the word iman is being used in the ayah itself, and bir is being related uh, to the reality of iman. But bir is something that is much more expansive in meaning. It means to engage in all that is good, to engage in all that is good. And it can encompass what is commanded, it can encompass the basic obligations of the deen, but it goes beyond that. It's not just about doing the basics, it's about going beyond the basics, right? And so the idea of bir here, meaning iman, is very interesting from the angle that when we look at what Sheikh Uthman Danfodi is covering, he's covering the reality of iman. He's laying the foundation for iman from two different angles. One, he's using textual evidences. He's quoting from the Quran and the Sunnah to define what iman is. And then he's giving us insight as to what the ulama have said. Now, the other thing that comes about is that he gives us a framework for what iman is that is very inclusive, so that the concept of iman, which is being presented here, is very similar to what we find in the hadith that talks about iman having 70 something odd branches. And so it covers matters of tawheed and the unseen, but it also covers acts of worship. And so that definition of iman is very comprehensive and inclusive. And so what we see is that when we look at the ayah as saying that bir is iman, as well as that which brings us close to Allah and the action which brings us close to Allah, we get a good insight as to what Sheikh Uthman Danfodi is doing here. And so what he's doing is he's teaching us what is essential to know of iman. And so the Quran here is negating that the idea of bir, or the idea of righteousness and pursuing that which is upright and good, is just a matter of turning our face in one direction or another. It's not just the action itself, but it's also a matter that encompasses what goes on in the heart. And in this case, what's in the heart is believing in Allah and the hereafter and the angels and revelation, which implies believing in the Quran and the books that came before and in the prophets. So this is something that has to do with the life of the heart and a commitment to certain realities that pertain to the unseen. The other issue that comes into play is that, and you can see it in Sheikh Uthman Danfodi's writings overall, is that he constantly is joining the inner and the outer, meaning the spiritual and what we're obligated to do as far as practice is concerned on the external level, as far as visible practice. And so he's shaping for us an understanding of what ibadah is. And part of the proof here that the ayah of the Quran is negating certain forms of understanding and correcting them, which is exactly what Sheikh Uthman Danfodi does. He is in the business of reforming our thinking and our practice and reviving deen for us. But we find that the tafsir of Fakhruddin al-Razi and Fakhruddin with regard to the word laysa, and it says kalimatun jamidatun wudiyat li nafi al-hal. وأشبهت ما في نافي الفعلية. So the idea there is some linguistic points. I don't want to get into uh, details other than to say that when the ayah is translated, it is not. The idea of it is not. Here, the meaning, it is not, is to make sure that we have in our minds what is worship. So, what is not worship is being negated and it's being excluded from the definition of what worship is. And in this case, Iman. So, Iman is not limited to uh, to movements that are oriented in a particular direction. Iman is not limited to what that means. That actually means prayer, and in our case, as Muslims, it means salah. The ayah also is clarifying for the people of the book, because this ayah was revealed during the time of the people of the book when they were having a dispute, or it was revealed during the time when the people of the book were disputing as to what the Qibla was. So Imam Abu al-Hayyan al-Andalusi, rahmatullahi alayhi, he gives us a couple of different opinions, and there's two groups of companions or early generation scholars, I should say better, and they transmitted how this ayat was understood by them. So Qatada al-Rabi'a, Muqatil and Auf al-Arabi, they said that this ayat was revealed with regard to the followers of Musa and Isa. And in the case of the followers of Musa, they used to pray towards the west. And in the case of the followers of Isa, they used to pray towards the east. And each one of them would make the claim that bir or righteousness was that. The other group is Ibn Abbas, Ata, Mujahid, Al-Dhahak, and Sufyan, radiallahu anhum ajma'in. They made the claim that this ayah pertains to the believers, right? To the believers, to the Muslims, to clarify for them what belief is. Interestingly enough, when the Prophet ﷺ, when he migrated, then we began to see the obligations of worship being legislated. And so during this time, the arkan of practice or the cornerstones of practice were revealed, and some rulings pertaining to criminal law were revealed, and the Qibla was changed towards the Kaaba. And so this ayah is teaching us a lot about the importance of leadership, because we know that the Prophet Muhammad والسلام, some people, when the ayah of the Quran was revealed and changed the direction of the Qibla, they lost faith in the Prophet والسلام, and in the deen. And so the idea of the ayah is also that, there's an obedience that's owed to Allah and His Messenger, versus just sticking to formality and not understanding the end game. So the commitment to Allah is one where the heart inclines to obedience to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. So it's not taking an act of worship as an end in itself, but is to follow the intent and to follow the guidance that comes from God. So Sheikh Uthman bin Fodio quotes that ayah. And so one of the things that comes up is that he follows that ayah of the Quran. It is not righteousness that you turn your faces to the east and the west, but true righteousness, or be it is that you believe in Allah, the hereafter, the angels, the revealed books, and the prophets. Then he quotes the hadith, the Messenger of Allah has said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, as related to Sahih Muslim, on the authority of Umar, and then he quotes part of the hadith of Jibreel. And here, Sheikh Uthman bin Fodi is defining what Iman is by way of Jibreel. He says that it is that you believe in Allah, His angels, His books, His messengers, and the hereafter. And so that part of Hadith Jibreel coincides with what it is that the Quran is saying. Surah Al-Baqarah, the 177th ayah. And except here that it says, and that you believe in the divine decree. It mentions qadr here, right? Its bitterness and its sweetness, or its fortunate aspects and unfortunate aspects. And then now he moves on to quote from the scholars, the majority of the scholars of the Sunnah, radiallahu anhum. They have delineated the parameters of belief as acceptance of what is known to have come from the messenger by necessity. That's a fancy way of saying that the acceptance here is one in which there's no doubt. There's one in which there's no doubt. We call that in the English language, in a little more academic sense, assenting, or scholarly philosophical sense, I'd rather say. Assenting, it means that you believe in something firmly without doubting, the idea of tasdeeq. And so what Sheikh al-Madafodio is doing is saying, like, look, people, there's some things with regard to belief that are cornerstone. And these things are the foundations for Aqidah. That's it, right? So he continues to make his point by saying that uh, Iman, it was defined by the majority of the scholars of the Sunnah as being agreement to or belief in with certainty in that which the Prophet ﷺ brought without necessarily having to get into a lot of philosophical explanation. Then he quotes the great Sheikh Abdurrahman al-Suyuti, who says that Iman in the Arabic language is assent, a tasdeeq, and in the Sharia it means the affirmation of the heart in everything that is known by necessity to have come from the Prophet Muhammad والسلام. That doesn't have to do with details or additions that are added to Islamic belief by the scholars of Islam. It's just what Iman is believing firmly in that core of what it has been stated with regard to what is Iman. Then he says that this is also the opinion of Imam al-Ashari, and the majority of the scholars take of that opinion when it comes to defining what Iman is. Then he moves forward to quote Imam al-Qurtubi, the Muhaddith, and he says that مذهب السلف وأئمة الفتوى من الخلف أن من صدق بهذه الأمور يعني الواقعة في حديث جبريل عليه الصلاة والسلام لما جاء إلى النبي تصديقا جازما كان مؤمن حقيقة سواء كان ذلك عن براهين قطعية أو عن اعتقادات جازمة. So here, this is where Sheikh Uthman Danfodi is very unique. He's making a point that is universal, especially in today's time. You find this held by different schools of thought. But there's also a point that is not emphasized much in today's time, in the more recent time, by some who are following Ilm al-Kalam schools, like the Ashari and the Maturidi school. It's a position that is known in the Ashari school, and that is that Imam Qurtubi, Ahmed al-Qurtubi, Muhaddith, is quoting in the explanations of Imam Muslim's collection of hadith, that the way of the previous generations and the scholars of fatwa, the imams of rank, in other words, is that whoever affirms or believes in the truthfulness of what's stated in Hadith Jibril with regard to what is Iman, without doubt, is a true believer, regardless of whether that person is using rational evidences to support their faith, or whether they just submit to the text and believe in it and its implications without having to philosophically work out their aqidah or prove rationally what their aqidah is. And then now he shifts. So far he quoted from a Shafi'i scholar. Then he quoted from a Maliki scholar. Now he's switching to quote from a Hanafi scholar, which is Al-Aini, the Muhaddith Al-Aini. ذكر العيني رحمة الله عليه in his explanation of Bukhari في شرحه البخاري أن الإيمان عند جمهور تصديق الرسول أن الإيمان عند الجمهور تصديق الرسول sorry عليه الصلاة والسلام في كل ما علم مجيئته sorry because my glasses are a little foggy في كل ما علم مجيئه به بالضرورة تصديق جازم مطلق سواء كان بدليل أو لا. So he's affirming the same thing that was said by Sheikh Ahmed al-Qurtubi. So al-Aini in his explanation Bukhari is saying that the iman according to the majority of scholars is affirming what the Prophet ﷺ brought uh, with certainty, right? With certainty, regardless of whether that is based on some sort of rational proof or not. So then the other issue here that's more detailed is that by saying that Iman is just affirmation without doubt, here is pointing to the fact that Iman in this definition is not including Iman being accompanied by action, right? And by qualifying Iman as being that is a belief that is reached by necessity, that's a fancy way of just saying that you're just accepting it at face value, what it is that is brought to you in the hadith about what it is that the Prophet ﷺ informed us as to what Iman is without having to go deep into it or rationally work that out. And in any case, the scholars that Sheikh Uthman then Fudi rahmatullahi alayhi is quoting, none of them are saying that the believers or the Muslims are obligated to understand the details of Aqidah. The only thing that they're obligated to is to the arkan of Aqidah or the pillars of Aqidah or the cornerstones of Aqidah is believing in Allah, the hereafter, the angels, the divine books, the prophets, and Qadr. That's the arkan of Aqidah. Then he goes and he quotes Al-Haythami, and which is a Shafi'i scholar. So he says, قال أحمد بن حجر الهيثمي في فتح المبين الإيمان لغة مطلق التصديق وشرع التصديق بالقلب فقط. So then he quotes Sheikh al-Haythami, who gets into the definition of Iman linguistically and as is found in the Quran and the Sunnah. And so they say, look, linguistically, we all know, basically. Iman, it means affirmation. That's it. But he says that in the Sharia, it means affirmation by the heart, and that's it. And that's where we start getting to some differences of opinion, people, because the scholars, especially the scholars of Hadith, they include confession with the tongue, belief in the heart, and acting upon it, with the body. So the discussion that comes up here then is action part of Iman or not? Mainstream opinion is that it complements Iman. It complements Iman. No one says that action is not obligatory, but when it comes to defining Iman, some of them put it in the definition and some of them don't. Now, the thing about Al-Haythami is that he goes on to say that the heart must be made to submit, right, to everything that's known necessarily to be from the deen of Muhammad. And ثم قال بعد كلام وحد الإيمان بما ذكرناه هو مختار جمهور الأشاعرة وعليه الماتريدية. ثم قال بعد ذلك فيجب التصديق بكل ما جاء به عن محمد من الاعتقاد وهو ما قصد منه اتقاده أو عملي وهو ما قصد منه العمل معنى التصديق به. So here simply put, Al-Haythami is saying that the core opinion of the Ash'ari school and the Maturidi school is to believe with the heart, with no doubt in what the Prophet ﷺ taught with regard to uh, iman. But then he adds that he says that it's obligatory to affirm with the heart as being true everything that the Prophet brought, whether it pertains to belief or whether it's a matter of action, right? And so that's a way of reconciling between the different schools of thought. Let's read the English translation and we close out. Allah Ta'ala says, "It is not righteousness that you turn your faces to the east and the west, but true righteousness is that you believe in Allah, the hereafter, the angels, the heavenly books, and the prophets. The Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has said, as related in the Sahih of Imam Muslim, on the authority of Umar, when Jibreel asked him about true belief, about Iman, it is that you believe in Allah, His angels, His heavenly books, His messengers, and the hereafter, and that you believe in the divine decree, its fortunate and unfortunate aspects. The majority of the scholars of the Sunnah, may Allah be pleased with them, have delineated the perimeters of belief, Iman, as acceptance of what is known to have come from the Messenger by necessity. Abdul Rahman Suyuti said in his commentary upon Al-Qawakib, true belief linguistically means acceptance, while according to the Sharia, it means the acceptance of the heart of everything which is known by necessity to be that which the messenger came with exception to matters that emerge from independent judgment or ishtihadat. That, that's a point we can talk about that in the next session. It is in accordance with the majority of the Ashari scholars, what they adhere to, taking their proof from the words of the messenger with regard to his explanation. And, and to be honest with you, here the translation in the Arabic says that is the position of the Ashari, Imam al Ashari, and the school, not just the Ashari theologians. Imam al Qurtubi mentioned in his commentary on Sahih Muslim the school of thought of the early community, or the Madhab al Salaf, and the Imams of the later day communities, or the Madhabs of the Fatwa, or the Imams of Fatwa, are agreed that whoever accepts these matters, meaning those mentioned in the above tradition of Jibreel, uh, with firm conviction, is a believer in truth, regardless of that if that belief is derived from uh, irrefutable proofs, or basically if it's based on rational evidences, or is affirmed from tenets of belief, meaning that you come to accept it with no doubt and affirm it with certainty. In such a manner, the life span is made to have value. Then he quotes Imam al-Aini, who commented on Sahih Bukhari. True belief, according to the majority of scholars, means acceptance of what the messenger brought by necessity, with absolute certain acceptance, regardless if it is with proof or not. The words unqualified acceptance indicate that it's not necessary that this belief be connected to the actions of the limbs and the words, and that's basically what's in Aqidah Tahawiyah. Although Imam Ibn Taymiyyah and Imam Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani and a good portion of the scholars of Hadith, like al-Bukhari and others, don't accept that definition of Iman. They include action to be part of Iman, although they don't say that is necessary. They say that it complements. Some may have that opinion that is necessary uh, as part of Iman, but that's a discussion in and of itself. Discussion in and of itself. Hafid ibn Rajab rahmatullahi alayhi talks about that issue as well in the 40 Hadith in his explanation of Hadith Jibreel. Mainstream opinion is that action complements Iman. Action complements Iman. When you include action to be fundamental to the definition of Iman, if a person leaves it out, then that means you start getting into a conversation where that person still has Iman or not. And because sins are graded, they're not all at one level. And because we don't believe that a person is a kafir just because they sin, that's why you find that the scholars overall, they say that action complements Iman. It can be included in the definition, but it's not essential to the definition, right? But in any event, there's nobody that differs among the scholars in saying that we're obligated to act on the deen. They're careful in having the discussion about Iman because it can lead to a person being accused of no longer being a Muslim if they're deficient in their practice. And there's big discussions with the issue of Salah in this regard, and and other practices as well. But we have to be careful how we talk about Iman because of the implications. In any event, I want to stop there. The PDF is left for your reading. Is linked to this class. Is linked on the Facebook page as well. But the idea here is that Sheikh Uthman bin Fodi is saying that Iman is to believe in the cornerstone tenets of faith. And there's no necessity to go into details of Aqidah. What's important is to have an understanding of the core beliefs and then to believe in them with certainty. And he opens the door for those who don't want to engage in rational uh, investigation of Iman, or they don't need rational proofs, and those who are accepting Quran and Sunnah as is, right, without needing deep or detailed philosophical discussion. Another point is that he's saying that it's not obligatory for us to go very deep into details of Aqidah, where we just need to know these cornerstones of belief, and that constitutes faith for us or Iman for us. He does this to clarify for the students of knowledge how it is that they should be teaching the people. Don't confuse the people with a lot of details. Give them information that makes things clear and makes it easy for them to practice. And when they get to a certain level, they can go into details, but at the foundational level, they should be clear on what it is that they're believing without complexities or without much debate and so on and so forth. These things are foundational and universal teachings with regard to what Iman is. And so at this point, we end people, we ask Allah to accept from us and to forgive us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.